it.
All right.
Okay, now it's dangerous.
And Emily and Claire, I don't know if you saw the link in the chat. I'm going to send it again. Yeah, just so I make sure I get you guys, get your certificates and yada, yada, yada. All right, is everybody, nope, 12. I think we're all back. All right, you want me to share my screen?
Sure.
All right, here we go.
All right. So right now we're going to talk about just kind of an overview of communication. I think we've all learned a lot about communication, but there's hopefully some new things in here that we can kind of let you guys know about. Next. So communication is differing and understanding the meaning. I think we talk about it a lot, but it's really how they're understanding it and what you're understanding and like the interpretation of both of those things. So we talk about like written communication and verbal communication and all these things we talk about. It's really how can you get your message across in a way that is understood well by other people. So really kind of taking the time to think about that, thinking about the wording you're using, the language you're using, even the grade level of the words you use, and like, is that accessible to the people you're communicating with? So there's different types of communication. The verbal one about how you're speaking, the tone of your voice, saying when you talk. Nonverbal communication, so if you're using your hands, if your arms are crossed, things like that. There's things in nonverbal communication that I think are kind of iffy. Like they say that if you cross your arms, you look like you're not paying attention, but some people just do that because they're cold. Like the nonverbal part can get a little funky sometimes. Visual communication, so really considering who your audience is, only using visuals if they add value, the way that you format things and for clarity for the people that are receiving that message. And then in written communication, really striving for simplicity. I know there's a lot of newsletters and emails we send to staff and whatever. If they get too long, people just won't read them. So if you can really try to work on simplifying some of your written communication, that will really help kind of limit the message you're trying to send that needs to be received by the person that is reading the communication. And keep a file of writing you find effective or enjoyable. Writing is definitely its own thing that can be very complicated. Next.
And we also have to remember that even though we have a message and we know how it's supposed to be received, we always have to check for understanding because we all know everybody has a different either bias or listening cue or cultural, that whatever you say might be misinterpreted. So you always need to be, that's where that feedback is really important because, like checking in with somebody, say, hey, did you have any problem with that email? Or do you have any questions? And that's where things might rise, just real quick, as you check in with people, because that's where misunderstandings happen all the time. I'm going to be honest, as when I worked for DPS, I had to communicate with upwards of 2,000 people, and it did not matter how simple. And I always had like 14 people go through my email that was like, if it went to everybody, and invariably a good 15 to 20% took whatever was written in a different way. And it's just human nature. You just have to realize that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So creating successful communication in the workplace, really thinking about the right technology that you're using. I think now in this virtual environment, a lot of you guys have your teachers in person and that's great. If you're meeting with the board in a virtual environment, like really kind of thinking about how that comes across, ways that you can communicate effectively, speaking up, being clear, sharing your screen to really share what you're talking about. I know that even, at the council, I'll be in meetings sometimes where people are just talking through things. And I'm like, can we just share the screen so I can see what you're talking about? Because that would really help. Just trying to use technology in a way that's effective and clear for people. Understanding what your team needs from you and the best way that they receive information is helpful. Sometimes that's in multiple ways. Is there a chart of the visual schedule you want or an example of the visual schedule you might want them to implement? Is there a chart about, different types of time that they have or breaks or how long they're taking on breaks? Like really thinking about just different ways that you can use some of that stuff. You might also have some challenges in, again, as Lucy said, the way that people are interpreting things. So really think about challenges you've encountered. Like, well, I noticed that when I talk about timesheets, that I always get this big rage of a wave of people that are upset about something. How can I communicate this in a way where they're being clearly understanding what I'm trying to say? Don't forget old school channels. I know things in writing are kind of dying away, but Sometimes you have those people that are parents or teachers that really need a paper in their hand to read, and that's like how they receive information in the best way. And then again, creating that short and precise content. Don't make it too much more wordy than it needs to be. Just trying to, bullets are great. I know we've all seen emails where it's like a novel, like just bullets are good. Like this is what's happening. This is what's going to happen. This is how it impacts you. Like just those things are really easy, just that conciseness. Next.
Dora, let me add something else for Spanish. For people who speak English as a second language is very, so if you guys have staff who English is the second language, is this much easier to have something on paper or something like a visual that helps us understand maybe, you know, some, yeah, whatever you want to communicate, but it's just really, really helpful most of the time for us.
Thanks. That's
Mhm.
input. Yep. So some of the nonverbal communication that you guys might be saying or noticing are the ways of talking, pauses, the emphasis on words that you are encountering when you're talking to people, the posture, appearance, head movements. These are all things that like when we pay attention, we'll notice, but generally we might not notice these things. But it gives us a feeling that people is listening, someone's listening, not listening, that they're awake, that they're tired. Like with Lucy, when she leans her hand on her head like that, I usually interpret like she's a little maybe out of it with her Benadryl and coffee, you know. But paying attention to those things, like the specifics you really have to tune into, but the general impression you get from all of these nonverbal cues is something that will give you an interpretation of how they're feeling or if they're receiving your message or not. So gestures, facial impressions, body language, verbal, you know, inflections. It can also be a standalone communication in itself. So even if you're the one talking and the person's not saying anything, if they're frowning or just looking away or not really paying attention, like those are the things that tell you that they're not paying attention. So really looking at that and taking it as a message when you're talking to somebody can be important.
And it's also your own body language, being sure that you're being as neutral and direct as possible. And also, like I think Dora already mentioned too, watching your tone of voice. Sometimes you may feel your tone is even keeled, but if you're an excitable person or dramatic, sometimes people will take that the wrong way. So that's definitely something to think about when you're communicating, especially something important.
Well, I think this is kind of where some feedback comes into play too. You know, like if you're getting feedback from your staff that they feel like you're not listening when they talk to you, that might be something you're doing. Like maybe they're talking to you, but you're busy kind of looking around or listening for the door or hearing the phone. And maybe something that you're doing in your nonverbal communication is what is giving them the impression that you're not listening. Or if they say you always seem like you're in a bad mood, maybe it's the way you're standing or your arms are crossed and you're kind of frowning, or like something about the impression you're giving off non-verbally is what's telling them that, because it's not something you're saying necessarily. It seems like they just are getting those tones from what they're observing.
Right.
Communication for effective leadership. So communicate relentlessly. Like if there is a change and you just send out one email or one piece of paper or something, they're probably just going to forget that. So if there's big changes or even little changes that are happening, just really communicating all the time, just a constant flow of communication, making sure it's simple, it's direct, it's to the point, you've got bullets, you have a visual if that's helpful for people or something you can create, and then listen and encourage input into what the communication is. And also illustrating through stories. Like a lot of the things that Lucy says are different stories, different anecdotes. So if you're writing something about a late policy, we're not letting parents come in after 9 o'clock anymore. If you have a parent that comes in and it's 9 o'clock, this is an example of what you can do or what you can say. Like illustrating that through the stories that really help people understand is helpful. And then also confirming with actions. Like, did you get that communication? Do you have any feedback? Do you have any thoughts on that? Talking about it at the staff meeting, sending out an email, all of those things will really help because just one communication is not really ever enough. Listening skills. I think there's a difference between listening and hearing. And I think when you guys are really busy in that day-to-day thing and so many things are happening and you're in the kitchen and the door's ringing and the phone's ringing and all these things are happening, you can hear what someone is saying, but you're not really listening. And it's totally okay to say, you know what, Lucy, I understand you want to talk to me about this and it's important to you and that makes it important to me and I care about you. this is not a great time right now. Like there are too many things going on and I can't really listen to you in the way that I want to listen to you right now. And that can be useful with our families, our kids, our spouses, whatever. Like if you really want to listen to somebody, you need to take the time and space to really listen and not just hear that they're talking to you. So choose to listen and be an effective listener, listening to understand what that person is saying. Don't interrupt unless necessary. And again, like really focusing on it. If you can't sit down and focus on what someone is saying, it's a bad time to be trying to listen to them. Like it's just not going to go well. Pay attention to the story. How are they expressing it? Are they upset? Are they being dramatic? Are they crying? Are they yelling? Like, what is the feeling coming through with the message that they're telling you? And kind of read their body language. Like, I hear that you're saying this. You seem really upset. You know, let's talk about what I can do to help you. It sounds like this parent is frustrated about math or whatever that may be. Like, summarize what you're hearing. If you don't agree, like if you get into that challenging conversation, which we'll talk about later, but just summarize that you're hearing them. I hear that your co-teacher's late and you're upset. I hear that this child is, you know, acting out in your class and it's making it hard. Whatever that is, and then ask if they want a solution. Some people just want to vent. They just want to be heard. They just want to rant and rave, and then they'll be done. They're like, okay, I just feel better now. I just had to tell somebody. Okay, great. If they want a solution, you can say, like, do you want me to help think through something you could do about that with you? But again, you can see from this that it really is a dedicated time to listen. They're trying to catch you in the hallway, like I know teachers do, or they're trying to catch you while you're passing out lunch or breakfast. It's not a great time. It's okay to say, you know what, I really want to listen and hear you. I just can't right now. So let's set aside a time to try to do that. And it's really important. This shows them that you care about them when you take that time to really listen.
And I was going to say, one of the strategies in a course I was in years ago, and it really has been effective, especially if you're receiving feedback or you're having to give feedback that is basically like a difficult conversation. Take notes because those are always fraught with emotion. And somebody will usually come back and go, well, you said, or you might even say, you said. And if you're taking notes, like Dora said, you can go back and summarize, even if you're emotional, if you just jot the facts. You don't have to write exactly what they're saying, but jot the facts. That usually helps everybody kind of stay on the same page. And, you know, even though it's fraught with a lot of emotion, at least you can try to stick with the actual facts. And sometimes when you read back to someone what they said, or even you're reading back what you said, you go, oh, okay, yeah, no, that really wasn't my intent. You know, let me reframe this. So taking notes, especially in a difficult conversation, is really important.
Encouraging dialogue and controlling the conversation. So I think we worry a lot about conflict. I think in ECE, there's a lot of people that are kind of conflict avoidant, but that really is a part of leadership. Like you have to be able to have conversations that might make you uncomfortable. The difference between a conflict, and this is kind of like the boss versus the leader thing. Like the conflict is like getting brash with somebody or making it personal and it's kind of like uncomfortable. Dialogue encourages resolution. So instead of saying, you're late, you're always late, it's such a pain for me, your teacher's mad at you because you're always late, like, I don't know why you can't get your act together. That is not helpful to anything. Like that's just going to make that person feel bad. You're focusing more on that person instead of the behavior. So instead of talking about really how she's late, it's just kind of this rant about how she's just being irresponsible and how that's impacting people. So the dialogue would really be, I'm noticing a pattern that you are having a struggle trying to get here on time. What can we do to really help you? Like, how can I support you? Let's think of some different options we could have. Do you need to change your schedule? Do you need to be a closer instead of an opener? Like, what are some ways that we can fix this? And that dialogue is more focusing on the behavior instead of the person. So there are very much a difference between a conflict and just a dialogue. One is more person driven and one is more, you know, what is the behavior and how can we fix it together?
Yeah. The second one, the dialogue is more solution oriented. By the way, you'll see the conflict has a hyperlink. There's a good 3-minute video from Harvard Business School on conflict. So if you have time, we don't have time in this space, but I would watch it because I do remember it was quite good.
So the way to kind of support that behavior conversation is to ask open-ended questions to encourage broad thinking and participation. Use closed-ended questions for details. So really thinking about the kinds of questions you're asking and then really actively listening to what they're telling you. So an open-ended question might be like, tell me why you seem to be struggling to get here on time. Like what What obstacles are you encountering as you're trying to do that? Maybe that's I don't know, the child is taking too long to get ready, or their alarm clock's not going off, or whatever that may be. But listening for those open-ended details to give you more information on the behavior and what's happening, and then close-ended questions also just kind of strategically as you go through that conversation. Don't evaluate them, kind of, listening without judgment. So if their child is taking a long time to get ready every morning, you don't need to judge them for their parenting or judge the child. Just, okay, like I'm hearing that these are some of the struggles you're dealing with. Being comfortable with silence. In coaching, we learn a lot about pausing. And you'll notice that when you talk to people, if you just kind of wait, they'll usually start talking. Like people don't like that. And they'll usually start talking, which can give you a little more information instead of just, I think we feel pressure sometimes to go back and forth and have like timing of conversations be quick and interactive. If you just pause, people will probably tell you more than they were originally going to tell you, just to fill that silence. Paying attention to their body language, seeking to understand. And again, okay, so what is the issue? What is happening? And then offering genuine support. If people feel like they come to you and you really want to support them in finding a solution, that will encourage them to come to you instead of if they come to you with a problem, they're going to get yelled at or told that they're always late or, written up or whatever. Like they want a place to feel supported. And the more you can do that in your leadership, the better your culture will be. Next. Control conversations. So I think we've all seen like when conversations can get out of control, like people get angry and they leave, or people start crying, or people just shut down. Maybe it's two teachers that aren't getting along and like they just close down. So how can you really control the conversation to keep it in a way that is, productive and constructive? So these are the things that you want to kind of recognize these and try not to let it get this far. So try not to let people, critique other people and more just the behaviors. Offer new information if they have something that they want to tell you or something that maybe hasn't been considered yet. Negotiate a change in other conversations. Trying not to take it personally. And if somebody's really upset for a reason, it's okay to say, I see you are really upset about this. Like, I see this is frustrating for you. You're upset about it. It's causing you some frustration. And don't lay blame on people either. Like, try not to blame the people, but just the behaviors. So it's not, Lucy, you're always late and now your co-teacher is really struggling. Just like, it seems this last week you've been late 2 out of the 5 days. What can I do to support you in being here on time? Because it's causing like kind of a domino effect down the road. Because maybe Lucy doesn't know that. Maybe Lucy comes in late and her teacher acts like everything's fine and nobody's saying anything. And she really doesn't know like the effects that this behavior is having, but not her as a person. Really thinking about that is important.
I would say also too, when you get a copy of this presentation, you'll see some of the notes and we offer some sentence stems, some things that honestly I tell teachers, I used to tell them because you need sentence stems when you work with children, but also directors and principals, you need sentence stems, and just even putting them somewhere like on a card where, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you kind of have an inkling of what it'll be about, just going through those sentence stems real quick so that you're ready. That's why scheduling a conversation is one of the best things you can do, especially if it's not just an informative thing like, hey, I need to leave at this time or whatever. Things like, I appreciate you making us aware of this. How do you think this should resolve? If we went that direction, like when somebody offers an idea, a lot of employees have some really good ideas. And some of the quote unquote good ideas, though, are not practical at this point. So that's where you can say, so that you're listening to them. If we went that direction, what do you think would happen? How could we implement that? Helping them think through so they don't feel like you're not valuing their suggestion. You're actually saying, there might be some validity to this, but I don't see how to make it happen. Coincidentally, you may actually learn about a new idea that you could implement. And then on the other side of the coin, this is where Dora and I even talked about this, I think in the last or first class, that a lot of people have no idea what you're doing, all the depth of what you do. And then when you can offer, go, you know what, I hear you, that sounds really sensible, but this is where I'm at a stumbling block. And you mentioned something that the background that they may not know, which would impede this particular idea from going forward. And then I love this one. When somebody's complaining or really upset about something, you could just honestly look at them. So what do you want me to take away from this? What should I take away from this, and how should we move forward? And of course, the typical, tell me more about that. That's a huge one. I think that's one I lean on a lot.
Yeah. One thing about what that does for transparency, you know, instead of just kind of blowing everybody off, you're really and valuing their ideas and what they're trying to say and giving them the power to be like, tell me how we might be able to implement that, or this is kind of where I'm stuck. What ideas do you have to overcome that? Like that makes them feel like they have a voice, that they're being heard. Practicing empathy, recognizing emotions in others. It's really helpful sometimes to just say, you know what, you seem really frustrated right now. Why don't you just take a breath, or like, let's just sit here for a minute, take a walk and come back, and we can just kind of finish this conversation then. Like those emotions can sometimes cause conversations to spiral out of control when they don't need to. And it's okay for you to recognize the feelings people are having, and that also makes them feel valued. Like, okay, Lucy's not going to let me just continue angrily ranting and crying. She's going to tell me to take a breath so I can get my thoughts together, so then I can come back and okay, this is what I'm trying to say, and this is why I'm frustrated. Like that really does help kind of tone the conversation down so it doesn't get too crazy. Those fundamental people skills, really just caring about people. We are all human beings. Like we have bad days, we have days where we're stressed out, frustrated, our kids are driving us nuts, the dog's crazy, whatever that may be. Like we are all just human beings trying to do the best we can, and really kind of keeping that in your mind is very helpful when you deal with people. Have an awareness of what other people's needs or wants may be. Consider others' feelings as a factor in decision making. Okay, I know that we're going to have to move our hours to be longer now because we kind of took our hours during COVID. I know that's going to kind of stress some people out. I know that children's school schedules have changed. How can I make this communication and have this conversation in a way that's responsive, because I know people might be upset about this, or whatever that conversation might be. Like there's some things that we have to do as directors that we know are probably going to upset people, and really taking the time to think through that and deliver that in as empathetic a lens as possible. And always attempt to put yourself in somebody else's shoes to understand the person's perspective. It can be kind of hard to do this. I think empathy might be a skill that just you need to practice over time. I think we all have our own perspective and our own views, and it's important to hear what somebody else might be feeling. Like, oh, well, they have young children, they really want to get home, and being a closer is really hard for them. I remember when my kids were younger and how hard that was. I guess I understand their perspective, you know, but I really need them as a closer. So maybe we can try to figure out something in the middle. But thinking about that can be really helpful.
Exactly. And again, this is where, like Dora already gave you some sentence stem ideas. Other ones like, I see your point. That doesn't mean you're agreeing. You see their point. And that's the one thing you have to realize. By doing some of this stuff that we're talking about, doesn't mean you have to do or say or follow through with what just the employee works, because you do see the big picture. But it's also that feeling like they're heard, like you must feel so hopeless. That's a thing that literally I said a couple months ago when two teachers, there were three teachers in the room, in an infant room, and there was one that was in the middle. I mean, the two hated each other. That poor person, I mean, she was ready to quit, you know, so you want to say that must feel hopeless, and then build towards a potential solution, one that will work for everybody. And then, you know, some people have a lot going on in their lives, like you're in a tough spot. I feel your despair when you talk about this. I wish you didn't have to go through this. We know a lot of stuff's going on in personal lives, but we also know you have a center to run. And somewhere in there, while they're struggling, you still have to come up with a compromise where you're still getting done what you need to be done for the center. But using some of these sentence stems are a great segue to go, I hear you, but whereas a lot of times we have a tendency to say, I'm sorry you're going through that, but I have got to. And I will say that was kind of my go-to years and years ago. And when in the more recent times, I've had to prepare for something like this, or knowing somebody's going through a tough time, I've had to sit and reflect on, okay, what am I willing to do? How far am I willing to go to support this person? Are they an employee I want to keep? You know, and then negotiate that. But Dora's right. It's really hard to have the empathy part, because it's not hard to have the empathy, but it's hard to follow through with it, because you know you have all these families that you have to accommodate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then along with empathy, practicing acceptance. So acceptance is really when you can get to the point sometimes where it's not agreement, it just is the way it is. This person I'm trying to meet them in the middle. They aren't able to do that. That is what it is. I've tried to meet them in the middle. I've tried to do that. Maybe this person is just sassy or grumpy or not a people person and not very friendly, or, you don't like the way they talk to you, but it's from like a different culture or a different background, or they're from New York and the way they talk is kind of different and you don't really like it, but that's how they talk. It just is what it is. You can't judge them. Like, it is what it is. And sometimes you get to the point where you just have to accept that things are the way they are. And once you do that, sometimes it can really be like a peaceful way to just exist. It just is how it is. So-and-so is just scatterbrained, and that's just how it is. Like, so-and-so just cannot get their act together to get here on time, and that just is what it is. They're just one of those people that is constantly late. How can I work with that and try to see what I can do about it?
And that may be where you make that decision that it's not something I can work with. I mean, that gives you both avenues. Sometimes you can work with that, especially when workforce is so tight. But then there's other times where no, because this is going to create a thing with everybody on staff.
Yeah.
I allow this person to be late. So that's where your tough decisions are. But that's where you do have to accept it. Come, make your decision. And like Dora said, be at peace with it. This is what I have to do.
I see that a lot with teachers that have been teaching for like 20 years, and they just can't, they don't seem to have an interest in, or for some reason cannot start using like conscious discipline language or social emotional intelligence for children, or, they can't change from the old school ways of how teaching used to be. Like, sit on your mat, take this book, sit here, you're going to do this. Like, some of the teachers that have been in this field a long time are really struggling with trying to do that. So that is how it is. They're not showing interest in changing. Is it worth it to you to keep them or not?
Exactly.
So barriers to effective communication. The use of jargon and technical terms. This is something I encounter in coaching all the time, because there's a million acronyms and people are like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what it stands for. I just what this acronym is. Trying not to use too much jargon or technical terms, because that can kind of just confuse people and they won't understand your message very well. Emotional barriers and taboos. If this teacher has done something in the past where you really kind of aren't a giant fan of them, it can really change how you communicate them going into the future, and that can be an issue. Inattention, distraction, irrelevance. Again, if they're trying to talk to you and you're just like looking at a million different things or thinking about all the other things you need to do and you're not really listening, you're just hearing, that's not helpful. A difference in the perception or the viewpoint that somebody has. I mean, maybe Lucy and I are both talking about a ball and I'm thinking of a football and she's thinking of ball or something. Like, even when we're using the same words, we can be thinking different things. So really trying to be as clear as you can be in your communication. The person might have a disability where they're just not able to listen to what you're trying to tell them as much. A physical barrier to nonverbal communication. And that can be, many different things. Language, accent differences. I think now Denver has a lot of refugees that are kind of coming in. It's been this way for a long time, but there's a lot of different cultures and languages and ways that people use words that are different. So it's really important to be clear as you're talking. And then expectations and prejudice, as well as cultural differences. So maybe Lucy says, you want to come over for dinner, but she's from a country where you normally eat dinner at 4 o'clock. And I am from Spain where I eat dinner at 9 o'clock. And I'm like, oh yeah, come over for dinner. That'd be fine. We could have totally different perspectives of what time that would be or what that would look like. Maybe Lucy doesn't drink and I'm from Spain. We always have a bottle of wine every night. Like, there can be huge differences in just a basic meal that kind of help you appreciate where these other differences and influences are in communication. Communication techniques. So we're going to get to feedback here in a minute, but it's important to ask for feedback. When I sent out that email about the newsletters being done on the 5th of the month, was that clear? Did everybody hear that? Was that helpful? Offering feedback to people that are communicating with you. If you have a teacher that is always coming to you in a panic, it is okay to say, I know that things are frustrating and, things move quickly. If you could just kind of communicate with me through an email, or somebody's always trying to catch you in the hallway and their communication is always just grabbing you in the middle of everything. You know what, Susie, it'd really help me if we could make meetings to talk. I want to hear you and support you, but the way that you're trying to catch me and communicate with me is really a struggle for me. It's okay for you to say that. Think through your communication first, and then again, repeat. Put it in as many different ways as you can. Put it in visual ways, use your empathy, select a location. I mean, if it's a really serious conversation, maybe you want to take them out to coffee if you can get the room staffed, or maybe you want to stay a little later when it's quieter to really hear them. But you kind of know like what the depth of those conversations are. So picking a good physical location where you won't be disturbed can be really helpful. Again, using that feedback, using simplified language, don't try to get fancy with it. Just, this is a thing, this is what I'm hearing, actively listening. Again, trying to keep those emotions in check as much as possible. And if you need to take a break, take a break. Part of, I think, the effective communication part is taking that break, pausing when you need to, trying not to let it spiral out of control. Because I think that's where things go the worst. Like if somebody comes in and they are just fuming, nothing you say to them in any conversation you're going to have is going to help. If they are just bawling their eyes out and can't breathe and they're sobbing, nothing you say in any conversation is going to help them. Like, it's okay to say, you know what? Let's find a time where things are calm so we can talk. Okay, now you're really upset. Let's just take a minute. Like, let's just take a 5-minute break. We'll come back in 5 minutes. That control of those emotions, I think, is really what can help you the most in those conversations. And then again, paying attention to those nonverbal cues as well. The 3 C's of communication. So if you write an email or you're printing up something to send to parents or for your staff, is it clear? Does it make sense? Are you using too many words? Conciseness is a real thing. Like, you don't need to have as many words as you think you might need to have just to convey a simple message. And again, those bullets really help. In the next month, these are the changes we're going to see. In the next month, as we get ready for school year to end, we need to clean out cubbies. We need to do just lists of things and what's happening so it can be as complete and clear and concise as possible. Is it a concrete action that you're asking them to do? If you're asking them to be more mindful about social emotional language in the classroom, like that's a very vague thing, and people probably are not going to understand that the way that you're trying to tell them. Is it correct? There's nothing worse than rushing a communication and then finding out you need to change the dates, or finding out that maybe something isn't that way, or the training you're trying to tell them about is a different day. Something like that, like then you have to go back and fix it, and then everyone's confused and it's rough. And is it courteous and respectful to the person that are receiving the information?
Yep. I would say this is a good slide. When we talked about sentence stems, this is also something you can put on like an index card or in a file to kind of check yourself, because it's like, okay, did I ask for feedback or was feedback needed in this? It's a good little checklist either way, either side, the right side or the left side, just to check yourself before you send out a communication or before you sit down with somebody and go, okay, yeah, I need to remember to use some empathy. I need to simplify my language, wherever you feel like your weakness lie, because I would say in all of these, there's about 3 of them that are my weak areas. And if I don't rehearse or think about it, even if it's a minute before I'm going in even to a coaching session, I will screw up the entire session because I know that I will screw up in the 3 areas that just aren't natural for me, and I have to practice those. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to talk a little bit about feedback, and quite frankly, feedback could be almost its own 2-hour course. Feedback is essential for healthy organizational culture and to work effectively with others. Being afraid of feedback creates cultural dodging, and it usually will screw up. I know a lot of people are very nervous or embarrassed or get emotional when they get feedback on themselves. One of the things that Dora and I have always promoted is that you ask for feedback. I will tell you, feedback in the form of questionnaires is huge right now. It's almost like if I open my email or buy one more thing or any service, like I'm going to lots of doctors with this knee replacement, and I keep getting, hey, give us feedback. And I'm just going to be super honest with you. It's annoying. I don't have the time to fill back all the feedback. But what I do is I'm very aware I will give feedback when I feel like it's really necessary. Because I do know, hopefully they will grow from that. This course, we did not do a feedback link for various and sundry reasons because we're in a transition. But usually Dora and I request feedback, and a lot of people will constantly go down the middle or give us all 1s or give which are horrible or all 5s. And really that's why we've kind of gone more to open-ended, because the only way we can get better, and I will tell you this series we've done a couple of times, and it was with through the feedback that we got, that we modified a lot of things, because we were told, yeah, we didn't really think that was appropriate, that slide. I mean, it just didn't seem to fit, or this activity was really a bomb. Not that we're perfect, but we do need that feedback, just like you need that feedback. And it is kind of scary. I know when I used to get feedback as a principal or as a director, or even as a mid-level manager, there's always a couple of things where you just can't help but get emotional. But that's the nice thing about feedback, is you can do that on your own. You can read it, reflect on it, take a couple of days. You don't have to react immediately. And even if you feel strongly, well, they're not seeing the whole picture. I'm not like that, or I don't do that. That does give you pause for reflection. If it's onesies and twosies people, usually it's somebody that there's a misperception. But if there's a little bit of a trend there, that may be something like, no, you don't do that, which they say you're doing, or you don't act that way. But why do they think that? And that's where you reflect and go, I wonder why they think that. And maybe you do some probing at that point. One of the things that Dora and I do suggest is, because questionnaires are so prominent, maybe you do something every 3 to 4 months where you only send out 3 questions. You have a list of 12 you'd like to know about yourself, and only do 3 so that you can kind of concentrate on that and it's not overwhelming. Dora, you got something?
Also, this is kind of where the exit surveys come into play.
Yes.
So having high turnover, or really any turnover, like, you want to know why people are leaving. And, they say people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. In ECE, people leave for money generally. But if there is something where there's a trend where people think that you don't have integrity, or that they can't come to you with issues, or that you're not supportive, or that you look grumpy all the time, or that you're too busy, whatever it is, like, you would want to know that. So it's really important, even though it's hard, when people leave, to say, hey, can we just schedule like 15 minutes real quick before you leave? I just really want to hear your thoughts. I really want to know, because it could be something that's been bothering them. They didn't come to you for a reason, or a trend is always a problem that no one's talked to you about. Or maybe it's something people have talked to you about and you weren't really listening. And now you're finding out, like, oh, people are leaving. Like, this is a real thing now. Okay. Like, those exit surveys when people leave are really important to kind of get that information too.
And I would say the reason why Dora and I bring that up is because we've seen a lot of this recently in centers, as well as in some of the arenas that we've worked in. And it's very interesting because I think in one particular instance, it's stuff that's pervasive in this particular organization. And it's like no one's listening. I would also say that if an exit interview is not possible, because that is harder to face somebody face to face, if you do an open-ended exit interview, follow up on something. I did follow up on something about a year ago with an organization I was working with. It was a presentation, and it was only one person, but she wrote like 4 paragraphs about a particular slide that she took offense to. And quite frankly, it was a perspective I had never thought of. Now, what freaked her out was I wrote her an email, apologized, and then said, quite frankly, how can I this was the point it was supposed to make. Can you help me figure out how to get this point across in a different way? It kind of freaked her out. She actually wrote back and said, I never anticipated you would write me back. And she was uncomfortable with that. But after a little tete-a-tete, she did help me redo that slide so that I did the way it was intended. So that's one of those things that people are really shocked when you do go back and respond to their feedback. And that's what they need to hear, because that's all about being very clear. It's about being responsive, that kind of thing. So here's the basic definition of feedback. Obviously, it's information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task, etc., which is used on the basis for improvement. And that's the whole point. I will tell you, a lot of people only want to hear, oh, they were great, they were wonderful. And just like with kids, when we're talking with kids, we're not supposed to say just good job. We should say, you did a good job at picking up the toys, or I liked, and actually we should take away the good job. I mean, evidently that has become something that even kids don't understand. They just want to hear it because they know it's good, but they may not specifically know why they did good, just like when we correct them for something and we're not specific about why they're in trouble. The same way for adults. It's the same way. We need to be very specific. I like the way you did this. I was a little unhappy in the outcome of this particular project. I would have, let's discuss it. And then you sit down and say, this is the parameters. And maybe sometimes this is where you find out, wow, I gave them this job to do, but I didn't give them like a rubric or specific strategies. And that's where, they weren't wrong and you weren't wrong. You asked, you had a request. They did what they thought they were supposed to do, and you were unhappy with it. And that's maybe where you find out, oh, I didn't have a lot of specificity. And that's where I fell back. And, being honest about that, people really do appreciate it. And then this is just an acronym. Feedback is a gift. And when that's something that's really hard for a lot of us to accept, we all like the good feedback, but the negative or the corrective or the strategic feedback is really hard because we always think, oh, I'm a failure. We have to remember, you're not a failure. You're just there to improve, to become much more effective. Here's a perfect example, a good cartoon where the guy goes, anyone else care to share their feedback on my proposal? And this actually kind of shows how a lot of people, like your employees or your staff, may feel about feedback. Like, oh, I can't really say anything because they will count it against me. And I will tell you, there is a culture of that. Dora and I were just talking again this morning about someone we know that's quitting her job. And it's because she simply asked for a raise. And the board that's in charge of that center took offense to that. And so now she's looking for a job. And I'm just going to be really honest, Dora and I, we've got like 5 places we can have her employed, and it's their loss. And something like that should not be negative. But we also have to understand that does happen sometimes. And hopefully that's not a culture you're permeating or one that's being perceived. Remember, we talked about perception is reality. And that's why all the other conversations, like doing one-on-ones, doing short little feedback loops every 3 to 4 months, making sure you kind of get a temperature of your culture and climate so that your employees, while this may not be how you perceive, they may be able to, they may be perceiving this. And this is the other thing you need to remember. If you're a newer director or assistant director and you inherited a culture, you have to remember that culture is already being transposed on you. And that's even tougher, trying to break that up. No matter whether you say, hey, it's a new day, new time, things are different. People don't trust that. It really has to be proof in the pudding. Here's some basic reasons for feedback. And this is not just feedback on yourself. This is also, when you're giving feedback to employees, but how are you structuring it? Are you structuring it in a constructive way? Because some people are going to get emotional about it. And sometimes just giving them the feedback and saying, hey, I'm going to check back with you in 2 to 3 days. I want you to reflect on this. And we're going to have that conversation. I find a lot of yearly performance evaluations, or even if you do the sit down where you go over their goals every 3 to 4 months, sometimes that's not enough. And if there is something that appears negative or someone gets emotional, don't just like get it out there, say, this is how you improve. You need to go back and check in with them again and see if they've had some reflection. Do a reflective conversation, because like Dora said, when they're in an emotional state or you're in an emotional state, the situation will not be solved. And that's very much a part of the communication cycle. So here's some feedback. This is just, again, another list. Effective feedback focuses on specific, like Dora said, specific behaviors or factual incidents. And I am going to tell you, I've been helping a school district write their performance improvement plan form. The one they were using, or not even using, what they were allowing principals and directors to do is say something about you create a toxic atmosphere, and then start writing what they want them to do. And I'm like, whoa, time out. How is that person create? Where's the facts? The facts, ma'am. Where are the facts? What are they specifically doing to promote a toxic atmosphere? In other words, if you don't have the facts, don't go into the conversation. And also be careful about the facts. Is it just hearsay, or have you actually witnessed it? Or you have someone who's willing to own up to, I saw them do this. Not that we want a he said or she said, or the parents are saying something. You really need facts. Make sure you're direct, like Dora said, in concrete. Concrete is, this is what was seen, or this is what we saw on the tape, or this is what the parents saw. And this is what they believed happened. Now, what's your side of the story? Be very descriptive. Make sure it's job related. Dora kind of mentioned, like, say somebody from the East, and some of you may be from the East, so please don't take offense to this, but we do know regionally, people are not as a whole, but we have those stereotypes for a reason. The South is very polite. And I will say there's wonderful things about having a very polite demeanor. But one of the negatives is sometimes when someone's overly polite, you kind of miss what you're supposed to do, because you're like, when they couch it, we're going to talk a little bit in a couple minutes about like the sandwich thing. When you're giving feedback. And that was the big thing we were supposed to do a couple of years ago. We've now found that sometimes that backfires on you. And then again, we make fun of, and we see this on TV, New Yorkers just telling it like it is, and usually in a crass way. Not usually, but that's how it's depicted in movies and stuff. There's some things that's not good either. We want to be direct and concrete, but we want to make it at least courteous. Make sure it's well timed. Dora talked about this a lot. If something happens, and we see this a lot in centers, and I saw this in this school district, something happened and they're waiting 1, 2, or 3 weeks to talk to the person. And I'm like, yeah, no, 24 hours or 48 at the most. It's just like with children. With children, you have to address it right then and there because their memory is not as such. Also, memory, as they say, eyewitness accounts are only accurate up to 20%. And that's why a lot of people, when they go to testify, they start changing their story. It's not that they're lying. It's just that your mind does play tricks. Make sure it's immediate or close to the occurrence, that you're not waiting weeks. Someone said, well, I just wanted to see if she did it a couple more times. No, nip it in the bud. If it's a one-time coming in late, but we're on number 2, and the person says, oh, it was traffic, but then it's happening more, get on it ASAP. Don't wait 6 months or 6 weeks. Be concise, very specific. Check for understanding. Make sure you give them usable information. Possible strategies, or ask them, what can we do to strategize? Allow for problem solving. What's not effective, which is exactly what I kind of mentioned in some of my comments, is that what you're talking about is very generalized. A lot of the staff find you hard to work with. And I'm going to tell you, I've actually seen that on performance improvement plans. Okay, the staff finds this person hard to, and I'm not saying that isn't possibly true, but what specifically is happening? Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. So Jessica, if you email me, I can give you some samples, especially of some of the things that we've been putting together. But anyway, Jessica asked for some specific examples. Even the improvement plans, even when it's really specific, a lot of times you do have to make sure that you're giving the facts. Make sure you're not putting ideas and attitudes like you should be doing this, or your attitude, this, everybody has issues with your attitude. Well, what is their attitude and how does that come off? Is it tone of voice, posture, body posture, or the fact that they're snarky right after somebody says something? You need to be specific. Try to be non-judgmental. This is where you can be non-judgmental when you have facts. Make sure you're not attacking the person. Make sure it's trait related. Like, I'm going to be honest, I've shared with Dora, she is actually coaching a staff member a couple of weeks ago at the director's behest, because her attitude just appears very negative. And I think Dora needed more specifics about that. So they did kind of talk about it. Like, why do you think they feel that way? And then sometimes we need to understand, and even the staff need to understand. One of my very best friends has a very, her demeanor is non-reflective, like she doesn't react positively or negatively. And what happens is people that meet her initially either usually have a negative response because they're not getting that visual feedback. Like when she listens, she's just stone-faced. But I will tell you, once you get to know Pat, she's amazing. She's like the best friend. I mean, she will have your back, but it's really hard. And she's been talked to about that, but you know what? That's her demeanor. And sometimes you need to find that out. Make sure it's not ill-timed when emotions are high, as Dora just said. Don't sandwich between two positives. No, we've all been taught over the years, say something good, then talk about what's not good, what the specific issue is, and then say something good. Research has now found, and we have to remember, science is not perfect, research is not perfect. That was a good way to help deliver some information. And I will say sometimes it's still possible, but when you're continuously sandwiching a negative in between two positives, what happens? Some people don't hear that negative, or they purposely don't hear it. It's a defense mechanism. And then what happens is a director will even tell me or Dora, I told her, and that's a lot of times I'm like, how did you tell her? Tell me specifically. Now you can do that sandwich, but follow up with an email going, hey, remember, you're going to work on this, and we talk specifically on how you're going to change this behavior. And no unsolicited advice. And that is really hard for some of us, i.e. me. That is definitely something I have to work hard on.
Well, an example of the sandwich too might be, hey, you're a great teacher, you do amazing art activities, all the parents love the art you do, but you being late is really negatively impacting your teacher. But that activity that you did last week with the shaving cream was fantastic. Like, everyone loved that. It looks so beautiful in the hallways. So thank you for that. Well, what are they hearing out of that? They're hearing about the art thing. They're like, the late thing has just left their brain, and they're like, I don't know, I do good art activities. Like, okay, well.
Yeah. And that's what this first illustration is. Also, too, what's interesting is they're also non-related. So one of the things I've been reading is that if you're going to use the sandwich approach, which is right here on here, make sure it's somewhat related. Like, let's just go with the late one. That's just an easy one. They're always late, but they're really dependable once they're there. And their co-teacher loves working with that. So that's related. Do you see what I'm saying? Rather than Dora's example of you did really good at art and the parents really love you. Try to relate the positives within the realm of what you need to see. Just say, for instance, I really appreciate you as an employee because we can all rely on you when you're here. However, you're consistently late 2 to 3 times a week, or at least once a week, and over time, blah, 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 blah. And then go back to the positive. Your teacher loves working with you. The staff loves working with you. Let's talk about how can we fix this particular situation. That's where, again, you're being very specific. And then there's the weak feedback, and I think this kind of goes to Dora's illustration, so I won't beat that to death. It's where you're doing lots of ego stroking, and usually when we do that, it's because we're kind of afraid of telling the person something negative, like, this is a very sensitive person. Or for instance, I've worked with a number of people who cry, and one just recently last summer at a center, that's just what she is. She is not mad or upset. I don't know how to explain it. Her personality is such that when someone approaches her with a negative, she actually does really well receiving it. But because she instantly starts tearing up, I think all of us tend to go, but you're a good employee, but the kids love you, but the family, no, don't do that. Even if that is their response, we need to be able to, like Dora said, sit back, take a breath, let them go ahead and do the emotional. And usually someone that is a crier or someone that gets immediately defensive, give them a moment to take a breath. Or ask them, what about this is causing this reaction? And that gives them time. And then you can go back with that. So we have the not signs, not meaning don't do them, but do them very judiciously, do them well. But there are some other techniques that are just as well or even better. One of them is what we call the meat, the bread are intertwined, like the burrito. That's where you ask somebody what they think about their performance. Like, if this is definitely with a performance appraisal, you ask them to share their impressions, and then you discuss it. And there's a technique and a discussion to the inner wine. And you can, I believe I have a link somewhere on one of the slides, or you can just Google this. And it is a really good, effective thing. It's where it's a conversation and you're not totally in control, but you have a protocol for that conversation. And that's a really good way. And you could even do this about a particular incident, about them being late. You could start out with, you are a really good employee, you're valued, you work well with the children. However, the continual lateness is impacting or just you are continually late, how do you think that impacts the people around you? Let them talk through it. Don't you tell them. And I'm going to be honest, this is an area I have to work on a lot, of asking that, oh, well, how would you solve that? Do you know the repercussions of you being late? Maybe they don't even realize, but you try to walk them down that path, that you've screwed up lunches, breaks, yada, yada. Then there's the open-faced feedback sandwich, where you give a significant amount of critical feedback. And then at the end, because maybe it's needed, maybe there's a couple of things. Maybe it's the person that's toxic, but you have facts for that. And you go, you've been known to gossip. You've even come to me with gossip. You've been known to this, and because of this, a lot of the staff are finding you a toxic person to be around. However, and we need to talk about that, but I still value you as an employee because the children love you, the families love you, blah, 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 blah. And then you say, now let's talk about how we're going to solve the situation. And then I got a kick out of this one, the paleo diet sandwich, all meat, no bread. Just a critical message, no ego stroking and all. This usually happens, I'm going to tell you, as a director, a former director and a principal, this is really, I love the fact that I can now call it the paleo diet sandwich feedback method, but usually this is where safety is concerned. There's no discussion. I'm sorry. You left that child outside, or you were over, your group size was too large, or you weren't in ratio. There is no, we're not soft soaping this. This is a safety issue. I'm sorry. This is unacceptable. That's you have to. You don't soft soap anything that has to do with safety or emotional well-being with children, families, or other staff members. Here's another feedback model, which you can read more about. It's called Situation Behavioral Impact Model. You describe the situation with specifics, then you describe the behavior observed. And again, we're getting very much to facts. And then you describe the impact that behavior happened. So here, you're doing a lot of describing the results of that. And then you turn it over to the person and say, how are we going to solve it? How are you going to solve this? I'm sorry. And how can I support it? And then there's the radical candor model. So you can see there's a lot of models here. A lot of them have some of the same qualities. I would say, look over some of these and say, hey, this is one I can follow. This one is one I can follow better, or this one is, I'm going to keep a copy of this slide in my drawer, and before giving feedback or a tense conversation, I'm going to review this. Or you might keep 2 or 3 because one works better with one employee and one will work better with another employee. So here's an example. You're disorganized and it's affecting the quality in your classroom. What are you going to do to get organized? Now, that's kind of like that paleo. You're just stating that out there. I'm wondering, and I think that's the thing here, is that where we go paleo, all over them? Maybe you say, this is where, like Dora had given a couple examples like this, I've noticed that organizations become a challenge for you. How can I support you to organize your room so that it matches the quality of your instruction? This is a great way to handle a habit. Oh, no, Danielle, I'm sorry, because we didn't schedule a break, but you know what? If you want to go ahead and come back, you're not going to miss that much. You will get a copy of this. Another example is you've been putting your child documentation into the assessment system. This is an issue. You're not getting it in by the target date. Doing it at the last minute might affect the child's growth picture. Yes, that's true. That's what we want to say. But since this is not a safety thing, you might want to, and depending on the employee, now to be honest, depending on the employee, you may need to say it this way. If you have somebody that just doesn't seem to get it, you may need to be more direct. But a better way to do that is, you've been working hard, but I know documentation is an issue. Let's come up with a strategy. So you can see where neither one of these are totally wrong. You just need to pick and choose what's appropriate, like Dora said, for the right person. So this would be a good time. Well, actually, here's 2 scenarios. I'm going to email them to you, and I'm going to try to put them in the chat box.
Do you guys want to do like a 5-minute break?
Yeah, we could do that. Actually, we're ahead, Dora. Let's do a 5-minute break. And then I'm going to email this to everybody so that you can refer to it as you're working in the breakout room. So let's do actually, Dora, we can do a good 7-minute breakout. All right, let's do that. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. as you can see, feedback's really good for us.
Yes. Potty break. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we'll come back at 11:50 or so.
Yeah. Yes. How about 11:55?
Okay.
Ooh, thank you.
11:55. And then in the meantime, I'm going to email this stuff to you so you can read it. Okay.
Right.
And there are times, exactly, Danielle. And I will tell you what Dora and I are seeing more of is directors afraid to do that, which we get that. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk actually more extensively on how to host a difficult conversation, and then about toxic employees. And hopefully that will help too, because, you know, there is a point that you really have to look at the situation and say, okay, enough's enough. And we realize what we're hearing is this is a huge issue, the being late, the calling out, because we're trying to just hire anybody that's remotely competent or somebody that's competent, but we're overlooking things or we're afraid. We've had a number of directors go, if I fire this person, who's going to take their place? And we know of actual instances where they lost other employees because of a toxic employee. All right, so I'm going to quickly, we have one more breakout and we'll be done. And so we put something in the chat here. I like that. Actually, fierce conversation. Yeah, I love that term, Danielle. Thank you. Yeah, think of it difficult/fierce. I like that. All right, so here's the feedback model. And I'm going to be really honest with you. I find this is rarely done in centers. Before the pandemic, it was like everybody got appraised once a year, but there was no follow-up, no goals were set, and people were surprised or they weren't surprised, you know, and the people that were surprised were usually your middle of the road, decent employees. And then there might be an area you do good here, yeah, but you need improvement here. And a lot of employees get very upset, like, why didn't you tell me this? I could have, you know, strived for better. So it's really important. And I do know the pandemic came and we had to do what we had to do. Now that the pandemic's still here, we're still going to be dealing with viruses and stuff like that, but I believe we're dealing with it in a different direction right now. Now centers need to segue, especially with workforce being an issue. We need to be more reflective and more, like Dora said, what this whole point is, conversational with people. And it does start with the performance appraisal. A performance appraisal shouldn't be once a year. It should be one where you set the expectations once a year after whatever, but you revisit it or revisit parts of it with an employee at least every 4 months. And even with, like, I'm going to share with, I'm sorry, Jessica wanted an example. I'm going to give you guys a couple examples formats that I gave to Roaring Forks, and then I'll give you what Roaring Forks decided on. And a lot of it is based on, you know, they wanted some check, like, you know, they're a good employee, they're 1, 3, or 4, whatever. But a lot of it is before you give them a 3 or a 4. Again, remember we talked about just the facts. You need to write in why. Why are they a 3? They're a good, solid employee. They're dependable. Okay, that's fine. They're a 2. Well, they're not dependable, or once a month they call out, and I'm just using some very easy ones. But really, just like any conversation, this is an ongoing, a performance appraisal should be an ongoing conversation. And all research says a minimum of 2 to 3 goals should be set. And by the way, that's a whole course that Dora and I have done. If anybody wants us to do it, we can at least do one of those courses. But 2 to 3, and of the 3, 1 should be employee based. Like, this is what they want to improve on. Usually it's with their career or whatever. 1 that you both agree on, like conscious discipline is something your center is going to institute. So the goal is they will learn how to do it. And then number 3 is an area that you specifically called out that they do need improvement on. Even your best employees have an area. So that is, and then what happens is it's not so much that you keep revisiting the whole appraisal process. You sit down with them in one-on-ones, and you should be having those at least once a month or trying to. And I always say calendar them. And if that week was bad, then redo it the next week. In other words, you keep moving it till you finally do it. But then just what you're doing is you're doing one-on-ones on everything. But then you purposely every 4 months revisit those 3 goals. How's it going? How's it working for you? What do I need to support this? Maybe one of the goals is complete. You go, wow, you make a note of that. That goal is complete. If we're not concentrating on continual improvement and continual quality, then it ends up, a performance appraisal process ends up being just a, I got you. I got you. You know, I got you because you're always this, or you're always that, or the teachers are complaining. It really is part of your PD, your professional development process. And a lot of people do not see a performance appraisal process as part of the developing their employees. And then we talked a little bit about, this is just a very quick rehash, how to give effective feedback. Be specific. Remember I said, don't just an open-ended, generalized. You need to be very specific like we do with children. Be sincere, offer to help, and be timely. Those are probably the 4 biggest things that relate to effective feedback, other than you may want to go back and say, okay, was I clear, concise, yada, yada. Feedback do's and don'ts. Always be prepared, be direct, factual, and detailed. And we did say direct can be 2 ways. You just state it, or you may sandwich it a little bit in one way, shape, or form, just because of the person, or it's a first time offense or first time issue that you've had to talk to them about. And then listen intentionally. And I always say, take notes, because that makes sure you can paraphrase directly, and make sure you stay on topic. Don't wait until a formal review. Oops. And I'm going to tell you, I hear that more often than not. Teachers that get very upset or complain, like, I did not know that was a big thing. Or I know she was a little ticked off about that, but I didn't know how much. I didn't know it would affect my appraisal. Don't confuse job performance with the person. I'm going to be honest. I've had a lot of people work for me, and I'm sure the same is about me, people that I worked under. Some people they're just not your person. They're not your thing. Their personality is not your personality. But if they're doing a bang up job, for the most part, you don't have to like them. That's why the appraisal process must be fact-based. If they're on time and they're good with kids and they're safe, and that's all that counts. We don't have to like them. I mentioned my friend Pat. She actually did work with kids, not in a childcare, but in another situation. And a lot of people said even though she has no affect in her facial expression, people were amazed at how kids glommed onto her. And I think that's because kids have a sixth sense. They don't actually need somebody to kind of physically show. It was just her attention to children, and that told them a lot. And then don't only focus on the negative. Definitely focus on the positive. And again, be very specific about the positive. Okay, what if the company appraisal process does not align well? Okay, this is a very good point, Danielle. With what happens in the center one time a year, very general focus on college operations. So let me tell you what you can do. And it just depends on whether you know the company or the organization you work for. Use their appraisal process, but you sit down with your employees and formulate 2 goals, you and them. This is a contract between you and them, okay? 2 to 3 goals, just like I said. And it looks like digging into EC job description. Okay, so maybe one of the goals relates to that appraisal because it's very fact-based, that's fine. But then you come up with something you want them to develop, or you want to help them develop, or you get a coach to help them develop. And then what can you do for them, which may tie into the centers thing, or it may not, okay? Maybe that's where you mentor them. That's in one of our next series of classes. We talk more about mentoring and leadership in that direction. But I don't see why you couldn't do that as a contract between thing between you and your employees. Great way to get to know them. Great way your check-in becomes extremely focused, at least 2 to 3 months, every 2 to 3 months. Maybe you can't do a lot of check-ins. So maybe that's the foundation for an every 3rd month check-in. And I know sometimes that happens, especially with limited workforce. And then you can always delve into, and is there anything else? We're going to go through your goals. And like I mentioned, if one of the goals is done, you tick it off, great. And then when you go to whatever the formal appraisal process is for the chain or center that you have, you might be able to wrap that into a comment. You may not, it just depends. I know I've seen Bright Horizons, shoot, now I'm drawing a total blank. Dora, people we know, 2 of the local ones. Anyway, I've seen their appraisals. 2 of them have really good ones. One of the national chains, it's just very much a checkmarky thingy. And that's where I think having that covenant with your person and saying, hey, let's establish some goals here. All right. So here we are. This is our last set of scenarios. We're going to do about a 6 to 7 minute breakout and then come back and we'll wrap this up. This should be in your email. If not, I will definitely put it in your chat box. Go, Dora.
All right, here we go.